So for today's session, I did a lot of talking last week, so I'm still little bit in a talking hangover. So for today, it's going to be a little bit more of a discussion in the room, and that was kind of the point. So in part one, we shared the chapter and some of the aspects we could draw out of the chapter in the journal club. And today and in 2 weeks' time, we are going to discuss the applicability of an ethics of care and a restorative practice approach within our sessions. So here, please, I want everyone to be very open and very critical of these aspects. Just because we think it might work doesn't mean it will work. So the critical engagement would be highly appreciated. So just a quick recap of what we did last time around. I'm going to, let me just find it. It's not that one. That's what I would like to share with you, but I don't have to share it on the screen. I did a little bit of a recap of the article. So I've know we've asked people to read through it, but I also understand that everybody has a lot of things on their agenda and a lot of things they need to do. So what I am going to do is in the chat, just drop a very condensed version of the talking points that we had last week. So I'm sending a Word document that hopefully will pop up on your side relatively soon, and it just has some of the most salient points from the article. I will add the draft of the article again. So let me quickly do that as well. Let me just find it. And let me just quickly stop sharing.
Marika, I've got it on hand if you want me to share.
Oh, that would be great. Thanks, Jonas. Okay. Okay. So thanks for that. Then that will be there. And like I said, I've dropped some talking points in the chat as well. Okay, so just to recap, what we're trying to look at is we're trying to address the need for a collaborative approach to academic integrity, where both students and the institution are held responsible for any offences committed. From an ethics of care perspective, we feel institutions must understand the reasons behind students' use of dishonest practices, which can include institutional, psychological, and even environmental factors. So this approach really moves away from viewing students as decontextualized individuals. I didn't touch too much on the decontextualized learner last week, but to just recap on, or to just introduce that idea, is it comes from a lot of academic literacies work, where the idea of a student, where the idea of where we think a student enters a university as this perfect ready-made little package to be academically well structured and do things correctly is incorrect. And it also doesn't say that students enter the academy as wrong or deficient, but that we have to take into account exactly where students come from. So something that we always talk about, but kind of neglect when we talk about academic misconduct, is things like the fact that we know university or schooling systems draw very heavily on um, recall, where students are asked to parrot or verbatim provide answers to specific questions. And that is something that a practice that students come to university with. And we, as institutions of higher education, of course, think that that way of working with knowledge is incorrect. And of course, we punish when students regurgitate or copy verbatim, and we label it as plagiarism. But and that's because we don't acknowledge that this practice that students come to university with is something that they were taught in previous academic systems. So we can't see students as decontextualized individuals, and we have to take into account all the prior learning that they come to university with, whether that's from a schooling system or other cultural systems that they have been plugged into. So just back to last week's work. So in instances of overloaded curricula, it's very important that both students and institutions work together in this practice of recurriculation to ensure academic integrity. One possible solution is to form curriculum review teams comprising students and lecturers to provide feedback and assist with necessary changes. So here the idea is, if we have overloaded curricula and students just don't have enough time to do all of the assignments, they might feel, because of other pressures like financial pressures, like NSFAS, etc., that they must perform at this point in time. They can't get a bad grade. Then they might revert to some dishonest practices in order to survive within our system. So that is something we need to also think about when we talk about integrity and misconduct. And that, of course, we think links heavily with an ethics of care, caring where students come from, caring about the system that students find themselves in. And then regarding restorative practice, institutions really do have a responsibility to prepare and support students in various ways to build practices of academic integrity. Again, academic integrity is a concept that we talk about at universities, and it kind of got forefronted a little bit more since COVID, since 2020, with but specifically realizing that there's a lot of contract cheating maybe going a lot around. But academic integrity as a concept is very vague, or maybe not vague is not the right word, it's very abstract, that's the right word. And that abstract idea is very difficult for students to work with. So we just tell them, remember to adhere to academic integrity, don't plagiarize, etc. And that's kind of the basis of the knowledge that students have as well. So that's also problematic. So factors that should be considered is things like workload. I've touched on that. Students' digital literacy and their information literacy and the academic literacies, the support available, the education programs we have available regarding academic integrity. Are there training opportunities? Are there spaces for students to try it out, get it wrong, but not be punished for it? Because at the moment, everything is really high stakes, because all assessments count towards a mark, and therefore it's not a really conducive space for learning. We also have to take other factors into account, like students' access to devices, data, and electricity, students' fear of failure, the marks-driven culture that we do have at universities, and also things like power relationships between staff and students, as that can also have an effect if students too afraid to speak with the lecturers about the fact that they feel overwhelmed and they can't meet deadlines. Instead of reaching out, they might try to fix, in inverted commas, the situation in a different way, and that might be through dishonest practices or wrongful practices. So I've already dropped in the chat a document that kind of contains the highlights from the chapter with regards to ethics of care and restorative practice. There's a lot more depth in the chapter that Janis has dropped in the chat for us. So thanks for that again, Janis. But I did think the shortened version might help with facilitating discussions today. Since today's session is mostly discussion, that's very, yeah, I thought it would be very useful for you to have. So what we are going to move into is just some reflections and thoughts. So we can first maybe just open it up for general discussion in the room, since we are not that big of a group. But then I'm also in the chat just dropping a link to a Jamboard, which I'm also going to just put on the screen. So that's the second part. This is the one we're busy with right now. So just to get some thoughts and ideas from people in the room. The chapter that we shared and the discussion we had last week was really still very conceptual. We have not yet tried to implement this in any way, and it would be useful to hear from the group whether they think it is something that is practical and useful and something to consider at WITS specifically, since we are at WITS. So my first question, like I said, it's also on the PowerPoint, is which aspects of an ethics of care resonates with you when it comes to matters of academic integrity, and why? And the second question is, which aspects of restorative practice resonates with you when it comes to matters of academic integrity, and why? So it's the same question, just using the two different concepts we've explored up until this point. So I think I'm first going to give everybody just a few minutes to just think about it, and try to think about it within your own system, within your own space where you are, whether you are a lecturer or a clinical practitioner or both, or whatever the case might be. Think about what aspects of misconduct you might have come across, and whether using these two concepts would have made it better or easier to deal with the situation. And I'm very careful to not say to deal with the student, because it might not be that the student wanted to do something bad. It might have been unintentional, or it might have been stress induced, etc. So, and I know there's always people that will say, but there are students who are dishonest for just to be dishonest. And I do agree, there are students who are like that, but I'm hoping, I'm a little bit of a maybe a little bit naive, but I'm hoping that in general students are not trying to be dishonest, and that they're just maybe not that clued up on our practices and uses and how to do these things. So I'm going to give you 3 or so minutes. Let's make it 4 minutes to just think about it. And then we can start, just have a general discussion in the room. If you already have thoughts that you want to share on the Jamboard, you're very welcome to do so. I'm sure everybody knows how to use it, but just in case you don't, you just click on the sticky note. You can change the color, type your idea and just press save, and then you can move it around however you think best. Okay, so just a few minutes, think about it, and then we'll open general discussion in the room. Okay, so that has been a few minutes to just think about it a little bit. So are there any thoughts in the room that you think, oh, this is something that is not that resonates with you, or even if it doesn't, that's perfectly fine. Um, so any thoughts from the floor? Argentina, please go ahead.
Thank you for taking my comments. I really appreciate the work that you and Janis have put into this. Sorry. I'm working on a different project, which is trying to change the culture at the university, from faculty and a student perspective. And I love these elements that you're wanting to bring into curricular change. But my question is twofold. How has anyone in the room got experience with bringing students along in a successful way while they are still in the program? First thing. Second thing is how do you convince students and faculty to work for a future that they may not experience? Because our challenges at the moment is most of the concerns around academic integrity are very much now based, and students and faculty want immediate response to things. And the curricular change that you're asking for requires a forward planning strategy where only future people will experience the benefit of it. So those are really my two areas of question. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for those questions. I think it's very relevant at this point, and I have to say I don't think I have any answers to those questions, but just as a little bit of not a recap, but some things that are happening at institutional level. Janus, I'll give you the floor now. I know you have a better answer than I do. Prof. Grayson wants to develop a larger academic integrity course for students. So Janus and I created a 5-hour course for first years. That's part of the Gateway to Success. But Prof. Grayson wants to kind of structure and almost institutionalize it, so it becomes something that is part of the institutional culture. And there was a meeting about this yesterday, and a large chunk of that conversation was actually not about the course. It was about what you mentioned as well, and it was mostly a culture shift, that there is a large there's really a need for the entire university's culture to shift around academic integrity, because at this point we have a very punitive approach to it. You did something wrong and we will punish you. Thank you, end of story. And I think your question, and I loved your phrasing of it, how do we get people to work for a future they will not necessarily experience, is a very important and nuanced layer to that, because it's very easy to just say that the culture at the university must shift, the languaging about how we talk about integrity and misconduct must shift. But it's actually, how do we do that, and how do we get buy-in from people? And yeah, like I said, I don't have a answer to that question, but I would hazard a guess to say that at least in our spaces, we, because WITS is such a kind of siloed thing, we don't, one of the advantages of it is we don't have to wait for the institution to make a shift. We can shift within our own spaces, which of course can be quite daunting as well, but it could be something that can free at least our students in our courses to feel more open about integrity and learning about these things. So maybe in small scale spaces, we can at least for our students make it something for the now and not for the future. But I really take your point on that. It's something that does need to be grappled with in future. Janus, you can come in.
Thanks, Marika. So, yeah, I agree with Marika. I think, well, it's a very complex thing to change culture, and one of the discussions Carol and I had, and that's also why I liked your phrase that around staff not being able, to being part of it, or students as well, because it takes a while. So when Carol and I had the discussion around the BHSC the BHSC curriculum renewal project, I told her that, well, we should actually start changing the culture now, working on it, while we're busy with the curriculum renewal, because otherwise, if we try and sell this idea of more student-centered curriculum and so forth, then there might not be uptake if we actually didn't really prepare staff and students and so forth for it. So we kind of sat a bit and we thought about how to approach this. And one of the things, and I really think this would work very well for academic literacy as well. And that's also why we, like, if you look at the chapter, there's the same triangle that we used, which is about reimagining learning. That we were thinking about, how do we shift the culture curriculum, or how does context feed into culture and curriculum? And the first thing that we thought about is that people need to buy into your philosophy. It's sort of like what Simon Sinek, and I kind of like use him a lot, say that you need to communicate the why. People buy into the why you do something. So we were thinking about hosting shops with each department, um, to um, to carve out a learning and teaching philosophy, and that philosophy, so it starts at department level, then go up to school level, and then it moves down from school level to back to department level. And the idea with that is that it becomes a sort of conversation, and people feel that it's also a bit of a shared leadership approach, in terms of that staff feel that they were acknowledged in developing this learning and teaching philosophy. Carol and I recently spoke about it as well, around getting people to buy into the new curriculum. As last year, Richard and I also ran a thing about um, the future of higher education, or the future of the degree. And we actually wanted to critique the new honors degree that we developed. And what we did is we asked people to give, like, what does the degree of the future look like, and we can do the same. What is a learning excellence philosophy in terms of academic integrity culture look like? And people brainstormed, and they said that there should be, they said that learning in the workplace, or work integrated learning, should be part. The curriculum should be more flexible, etc., etc. And then we said, okay, right, use these characteristics, and now I want to show our degree program and critique what you've just written down. And in that sense, we can kind of get buy-in. And I think so I'm mentioning the second, that could kind of be the approach that we use to develop this philosophy, is that you ask people, get students in a room, get staff in a room, and say, what do you think an academic integrity culture looks like? And everyone brainstorm that, and then say, okay, let's critique our current culture, or how do we move from this, and then carve out your learning excellence philosophy around what academic integrity should look like. Well, that's just my thinking about how we can do it. But I fully agree. It doesn't just help we implement, a process or something, but we don't prepare the culture, because as both you and Marika mentioned, the core component of success for this is changing the institutional culture.
Thanks so much, Jonas. I really appreciate it. Any other thoughts or questions from the floor? Okay, so if no further questions for now, that's fine. I would really like us to engage with the Jamboard. So which aspects of an ethics of care resonates with you when it comes to addressing academic integrity, and also the same question for restorative practice? I see we already have at least one thought on the board. I appreciate the opportunity to learn from hindsight. Sometimes people learn by getting things wrong. I think that's a very valuable contribution, so thank you for that. So any other ideas, please do share them on the Jamboard. Okay, so there's some activity on the Jamboard, but there's also some things happening in the chat. So um, I think with these types of things, we do need a lot more time to think about something than I am actually giving you right now. So that's a lesson learned on my side as well for next week's discussion. I'll send the questions ahead of time so that there's some time to think about it. What we have in the chat, I'm first going to address that as people might still be busy on the Jamboard. So Argentina said, I appreciate the focus on care of the student as we need them to care for others one day. I think that's a very valuable point to make, especially in the health professions, of course, but I do think that's something that I hope translates into other professions as well, whether that's law or science or anything else. We do hope that students will care for others and through the work that they do, but I definitely see the applicability of that in the health sciences. So I'm glad that that is something that does resonate. Arshad mentions that instead of punishing students for academic misconduct, how about we make it compulsory for them to complete a short course covering the mistake they made? And I also like, Arshad, the fact that you phrase it as a mistake and not as something that they did on purpose, or because everything isn't necessarily that they were dishonest, it was that they did something in error. And so I appreciate that. And I think that learning opportunity is also a very important thing. And we hope through the ethics of care and the restorative practice approaches that that can happen at both kind of both ends of it. So where students get an educational experience maybe beforehand, but if something does go a little bit off course, that there's spaces for course correction to support the student as well. So I really like your phrasing there. Um, and then you also continue, Arshad, by saying, and then asking them to reflect on what they've learned and how they will use that to prevent that particular form of misconduct in the future. I think that's also extremely valuable and very necessary. I think learning happens in reflection, not learning happens in doing, but also in thinking about it. So that's fantastic. And also we hope that these two practices will be able to uh, capture that idea and concept as well. Then moving to the Jamboard, where does MOs signing off logbooks, etc., fall into this when the students' interns haven't completed their assigned number of procedures? So I'm not an expert in the clinical space, and Giannis, maybe from your side, how would an ethics of care, do you think, and restorative practice kind of figure into this specific scenario with the logbooks?
Just give me a second to where's that one?
It's on the Jamboard. It's the pink sticky note.
Well, yeah. So Marika, I think I told you some of the challenges before around that students would fake how many cases they've seen, and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had like a few students were caught around this, and I think this is where what Argentina mentioned around culture also comes in. Is that first of all we need to train staff in the clinical spaces around how to deal with academic integrity, and also give them a formal process, because I think people do pick up academic integrity issues in the clinical spaces, but they have no idea how to escalate it or inform people at the university about what's happening in the clinical spaces. So I think we need to think about how do we train registrars and clinicians and so forth around academic integrity. So the one issue we identified is a formal process in terms of escalating, and then I think having discussions with students. Maybe doing those cultural workshops around what is a culture of ethics of care, and a culture of academic integrity, and sort of let students kind of decide you know, what punishment should they be, because part of what Marika and I did with this as well is like the students are harmed that do not cheat or are dishonest when signing off the books and so forth. And patients are actually harmed if students log cases that they've never seen. So, having discussions with them around, okay, how do we, deal with students or what should the punishment be if students falsify patient cases and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I remember this discussion, Yanis, and it might be also that um, there's other contextual factors that we should also maybe address when students do this. Do they do this because they're dishonest, or are they really just bad at time management and actually not going to the hospitals regularly enough to do all the casework they need to do in order to for that component of the course. So there might be other factors that should also be taken into consideration there. But yeah, it is quite serious to falsify and especially impersonate, because if you're getting somebody, or well, some people impersonate and sign off for the MOs, but it might also be that they just say they've seen these cases and they've written that up and somebody needs to sign off on that. So here, I think what's very important is that idea of community, and that we broaden the community in these cases to not just be people at the university, staff and students, but also the patients and the staff at hospitals, the clinicians, etc. And then, like you mentioned, Jana, say, how can this be applied in these spaces, and how can people in the clinical spaces be made more aware of this and the processes. And I think also another aspect that might come into that at a later stage is making sure that the processes are very easy to follow and straightforward and transparent for people in the clinical space, since we know how excessively busy they are. Just from personal experience, my mother-in-law is a nurse, and so I have here regular horror stories about being understaffed and oversubscribed, as is the case in our situation as well. But I mean, when it becomes a life or death situation, it's a little bit more difficult. So also taking into consideration what they would need from us to make it as easy as possible for them to help us help students in those cases. Then ethics of care can also change the perceptions of you are a failure if you fail. Yes, I think that's a very important point to raise. We have this fear of failure culture, and if we can shift that, that can maybe have a positive influence on academic integrity. Orange sticky note, the care and understanding of the students. Some students tend to think that an option like suicide is the better alternative, as they do not seem to think they can talk. Yes, so here, taking this type of approach has positive ripple effect on other aspects of student life, which is fantastic. EOC includes develop understanding, academic integrity is with a positive self-interest is as plagiarizing denies opportunity to develop cognitive skills. I think that's also a very important point. And that's maybe also part of the culture shift in a more broader sense, because we have a tendency to see assignments and things as something, and that's maybe a culture shift with students, but as a way to get marks and get the degree, but not as an opportunity to learn. And when we see it as an opportunity to learn, that might be a more positive way to look at misconduct and to frame it to students. Facilitate understanding, that sign off for procedures, because student will need knowledge and skills later on. Learning is more important than the sign off. Yeah, so that links with the previous one. I think that that one is together. But yes, I agree completely with that. I appreciate the focus on care of the student, as we need them to care for others one day. Yes, thank you for that. Hoping this EOC might also foster a growth mindset to err as human. Yes, I agree. I cannot stress the amount of times I've made mistakes and how much you learn from those situations. So I also hope that it can foster a growth mindset. Then most policy documents have never been read and have definitely not changed behavior. I have this like the working through the video content. Yes, I mean, there's so many policies, and especially when I work with honors students and I ask them whether they know about the academic misconduct policy, student policies, the academic integrity framework, the fact that the plagiarism policy at university is now defunct since it has been replaced. They've never heard of these things, and that's maybe an error on the institution side, on our side. We just assume that students do read and understand these policies. Working with postgrads, there's faculty and Senate standing orders about what is accepted and unacceptable help, like asking for somebody to check your grammar is acceptable help, but asking somebody to format your writing is unacceptable help. And I don't know if students are even aware of these policies and things like that. So policy documents are not nice documents to read in any case. So I also think having a more uh, palatable way of communicating this information through video content is a positive move. And I think also that does link with ethics of care, because we are creating content that we know students would interact with, rather than just throwing dry policy documents at them. Then I appreciate the opportunity to learn. We've talked about that one, but I think that is a very important one. And then just back to the chat, Corsi mentioned I'm also unable to use the Jamboard. So I took in a 3-week induction course for first years, which introduced students to learning apps as well as teaching on academic writing skills. The tutoring approach gets students acquainted with the university's requirements and standards, which may mitigate students' learning mistakes at the tertiary education level. I think this course is a restorative approach to academic integrity. That sounds like an amazing course. Kosi, would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that? I think that's a wonderful approach.
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Can you tell us a little bit more about this 3-week induction course and kind of what you learned about or yeah, what you take away from it? It sounds like an amazing opportunity to learn.
Okay, thank you so much for the question and the opportunity to share. So we were trained as writing fellows. It's a course that's organized by the Writing Center. And we were then assigned about 55 students each. And the purpose of the course was to introduce students to tertiary writing level requirements. There was an essay that was given in a couple of videos that were given to students to watch and read on a topic of climate change. This course, I think, has been running for about a couple of years, but I only started this year. And during the whole course, students are interacting with us, the writing fellows, and it's sort of it's a tutoring, mentoring relationship with the students. So what I found was that it was very helpful because, first of all, it introduced them to the Ulwazi app, which is used by the university, which is a bit confusing to use at first. So that's the first point of contact. And then also, I think it also helps the students to understand the culture of the university in terms of communicating with someone from a different, interacting with
background.
Yes, with an academic background as well. So it kind of gets students at ease because they would also talk about their fears or anxieties starting university. So it was a way of just priming students into the university culture and getting them acquainted with what is needed both personally and academically. And also they were required to submit weekly assignments, writing assignments, tasks, and then we'd correct the paraphrasing, the grammatical errors, and also just give them advice and insights on what is required during the courses. And these are students that are from different courses across the board: engineering, law, business, health sciences. Every student was within the course. And I found that it was very helpful for the students to just get comfortable into the academic space and also understand what is required of them at the university level. And I also met a student last week who hadn't attended the course and was asking for help with the very same things that the course was giving to the students. So I think it's a nice way to introduce the students to what we are talking about today, ensuring academic integrity, but in a friendly, caring, restorative manner without being too punitive in that space, but correcting in a learning, in a culture of learning and facilitating their learning in a way that they are comfortable and safe to make mistakes. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. I've always been curious about that course. So that's the Climate Change and Me course that runs in the Gateway to Success. And it's so positive to hear that feedback and the way that you, as the writing fellows, interacted with the students. And I do think it's incredibly important to have that friendly and open space to move away from that punitive area. So thank you so much, Corsi, for sharing with us. And it does give me hope that we can move as an institution, not just as at faculty or program level. So thanks so much for that. So thanks everyone for your thoughts on the Jamboard. I do realize we are 3 minutes out, that we need to wrap up, and so let's do that. So thank you for your thoughts. It does feel like most people in the room think that these two aspects would be applicable in our spaces and that we could use them, or at least that they could have positive influences in our spaces. So our next session, which is on the 27th of March, let me just go back to the slideshow. 28th of March, sorry, will be kind of saying, okay, we've had these ideas and we thought about them and we hope that they are positive, but how do we ensure that these aren't just nice concepts that we talk about, but it becomes things that we can actually apply and do in practice. So for our session on the 28th of March, we will kind of start thinking about that. So the questions there is then to think about, so you can think about it beforehand, but I'll also send some questions on to Christine and Yanis to share with everybody who has attended today and the previous session, is really just to think about what would restorative practice and what would ethics of care look like in the spaces that you work. So whether that is, like Corsia shared with us, how it has worked in as a course with her role as a writing fellow, that would be fantastic to hear, and how that could apply in those spaces, and whether you are an academic advisor or a clinician or a lecturer, think about how these aspects could be applied practically within your spaces. And that's what we will kind of workshop and discuss in our next session. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending today. It was really fantastic to hear everyone's thoughts. And Giannis, is there anything else that you would like to just add before we sign off for today?
No, thanks, Marika. Thanks. It was a really, really good session, and yeah, looking forward to the 28th.
Thanks, everyone, and I hope you have a lovely Tuesday and a good rest of the week, and a very, very good long weekend. And I'll see you then on the 28th again. Thanks so much, everyone, and goodbye.